Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of G-Rated. I'm your host, Joe Bourget. Joining me today, Shawn DePaz, and we are here to talk about Reservation Dogs, which just wrapped up its third and final season on Hulu and FX. Shawn, I don't know about you, and I feel like I said this a lot in the last year, but like I can't remember such a beautiful and simultaneously gut-bustingly funny show.
Yeah,
that wrapped up so quickly.
Yeah, it was a nice little, like, concise little package of a show, but yeah, it was like the third season specifically, like it was deep. Like it hit some pretty heavy stuff. But it did do a very good job at being both hilarious and also dealing with that very heavy stuff.
It was. And for those who are not familiar, this is a show that was developed by all Indigenous directors and writers throughout the process. So it's very authentic. Taika Waititi was obviously involved with getting this project off the ground and whatnot. But it has this level of authenticity to it. And I think for me, season 3 in particular was really good because aside from the fact that like the core cast of young actors are all phenomenal, like this felt kind of like life, like zooming in on a very specific chapter of your life and then zooming back out and getting the fuck out and letting the story just speak for itself. Like season 2 was all about getting to California so that they could, fulfill one of the wishes that their friend who had died had before he died. And so it's all about getting to California. They finally get there. They have this beautiful moment on the beach. And then season 3 is kind of like what happens after that. And it's sort of its own self-contained story that's not like propulsed along by plot or anything like that. It's really just about the characters developing their arcs and coming leaps and bounds from where they first started season 1 when they're, stealing snacks out the back of a truck.
Which in and of itself comes full circle kind of in the season. But it was, and I think the thing I liked about it is like you mentioned it being really authentic and being very Indigenous, but at the same time, like it was a very universal message still.
Right.
Like your friends moving on, especially the kind of that last episode of them all kind of going their own different directions, people staying, like the whole thing about community and all of that, like it was a very like transcendent message. And even if the community might look different depending on who you are, it might not have like the tie that kind of an Indigenous community might, but it still was a very like universal message, which I appreciated. But yeah, it was like the way that it was all kind of set up was very interesting, but I think it worked.
It did. And it was, so the one thing that I liked about this was that it wasn't afraid to let its 4 characters kind of branch off in different directions, but ultimately still be tied together by community, which is a huge theme of the finale. Bear, he kind of starts off wanting to get out of there, and then he gets this construction job, and he winds up realizing what makes his community special and becoming a man, as his spirit guide puts it at the very end. Elora, wants to get out, and she's going to go to college and kind of better herself. Willie Jack learns from Fixico, and she kind of understands the value more of her community and her family now. And then Cheese, he sort of shuts himself off from his friends for a while in this season, and then through listening to the elders tell their story about a friend that they lost communication with, reconnected with them and realized the importance of his friends and family. And I love the way that it all of them grew in very different but united ways throughout this story. And it sounds very emotional the way that we're describing it, but it's also a very funny show at the same time.
It was. I'm not going to lie. I cried during a point of this last season. I'm trying to remember specific. It was, when Allora went back to, she met her dad.
Yes.
And, that whole, that.
Phenomenal episode.
That fucked me up. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, it is hilarious. It is so, the funniest TV I've seen. Like you mentioned, the young actors in it are so good. And at the end of the day, it is because, like you mentioned, it is so authentic to Indigenous communities. They got to be themselves to a certain extent. And I can't think of another show where Willie Jack could exist.
Oh my God. She is so good.
Hilarious.
Shout out to Paulina Alexis, because Willie Jack was easily my favorite character. But the way she would just insert a fuck at the end of the sentence for no reason cracks me up every time. But she was so good. The spirit guide was hilarious.
Yeah.
Every time he was on camera, I started laughing at something that he had to say.
Fucking just the scream, like the yells, dude.
Right. Just in the middle of nowhere. That was probably one of my biggest complaints about season 3 was he was there at the beginning, phenomenal. There at the end, phenomenal. We didn't get enough of him in the middle.
No, I agree. He is hilarious. And I mean, that could be a criticism about the show in general. Like, I get Bear was kind of one of the main characters early on. He wasn't as crucial in the third season. Like, they obviously spent a lot of time going down the paths of individual characters and stuff like that. But the spirit, he was hilarious. Like, he was hilarious, and maybe it's ultimately good that he wasn't in it that much because you got to appreciate him a little bit more. But
that's true.
I found myself like, I didn't want to say I forgot about him, but once it got to that final episode and he popped back up, I was like, damn, we haven't like seen him at all.
No.
Which I would, I also wish we had gotten a little bit more of. But
I agree. I mean, every time he greeted Bear with an aho, I was like, yes, this is gonna be a great scene. I also have to shout out randomly because as much as he played a minor role, every time that they brought White Steve on, I was laughing at something. Like it was so funny the way that they used him very sparingly throughout the 3 seasons, but every time they made fun of him, it was so funny.
Yep.
To your point, Ethan Hawke was a really great special guest.
He was.
As Elora's dad. Like, that was really well done. And I love this show for 2 reasons. One, I love a story that can speak to a specific group of people and be authentic to that group of people while also, like you said, having messages about life that relate to everybody. And I also love shows that can weave in and out of comedy and real life heavy shit at the same time. Like, BoJack Horseman will forever be one of my favorite shows, but that leans obviously on the much more depressing side, and this leans much more heavily on the optimistic side of things.
For sure.
But it is a talent to do that, and I feel like that episode with Elora's dad was a great example because of the awkwardness between them and like, some of the things that she would say. But
I mean, like, it started with her stalking him, basically, like following him around, and like he starts smoking weed and clearly gets paranoid. And then, which in and of itself was just like, oh, my dad's a stoner. Like, that was funny, but like, she like, that whole situation was funny, but it is like, it's very real. Like, that's the one thing I love about Allora as a character. And I mean, all of them, like you said, like you see them grow up, and like, it is like, specifically in that situation, like, not get too deep, but like, my life has been somewhat similar to Allora's in that sense. And like, it is like when you're a kid, you don't understand it. And it is like the way that she handled that situation was so like relatable and also frustrating because it's like you're being very childish right now, but you're also like
entitled to
being childish. So like it was very good. And then for her to just like, I don't know, kind of realize that like it's not fair for her to take it out on like her sisters more or less, and like like that whole relationship and brother, I guess, and like how that all came to be was just like, it was very fucked me up. It fucked me up.
It was a very sweet ending in that way as well. Like, they're all excitedly kind of asking like, are we going to see you again? Are you going to come back? And she's like, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So I appreciated the complexity of the topics that they were handling and the way that they did it in a way that felt real.
Yes.
But also felt ultimately uplifting. This season did spend a lot of time away from our main characters as well. It kind of dived into where they came from, which I thought came together nicely at the end when Willie Jack goes to visit her. Was that her aunt in prison? And that whole, visual helper of the way that we carry the people with us and spread it to other people, and that whole sense of community and family. I did think maybe there was one too many episodes diving into the past as far as some of the elders. I felt like it kind of lost steam in the middle a little bit.
Yeah, I especially because you don't fully realize until later on, like as far as like Maximus is concerned, right? Like, you didn't like when they spend that episode with young Maximus. At the time I was just like, what
I was like, who are these people?
Yeah, what is going on? Why is this important?
Mm.
Obviously, it ended up being very important, and I guess like you have to look at it in totality to really appreciate it, because like in the moment it is a little tough, but it is like even then those episodes are really good, and they set up for what I thought was ultimately a pretty good finale. Maximus in himself is another interesting character. Like there's just every character is so fascinating in this show.
Right. They did a really nice job with bringing it all together in the end. I did feel like you kind of had to push through, like especially that episode in particular. It was a very good one-off episode. But if you're one of those people that doesn't like those types of diversions, it was a little throwaway.
I liked it, but at the end of the day, like he did see aliens and stuff, and you're like, like it got like very CGI all of a sudden. You're like,
what's going on?
Oh, okay. I didn't know what was going on there. But it again, ultimately you look at it in totality, like it ended up being very good. It was a very tough episode to watch, but I was very glad that they went into the whole boarding school thing with Dear Lady and all of that, because that's one part of like American history that I don't think people really spent a whole lot of time talking about, or really even fully realize happened. I mean, we all know that like indigenous communities have gone through very terrible stuff in America's history, but like the whole boarding school and like stripping them of their culture part of it, and the abuse that children were going through at that time, like I don't think is a very, it's not a very prevalent like struggle that people don't know about it as much as they probably should. So I'm glad that they spent time, like, because up until this point, like it was not lighthearted, but it was lighthearted and by and large, and then they're like, they throw you into like one of the darkest moments of American history, and you're like, and I think it does a very good job at like making sure that gut punch gets delivered. Like you're having all this fun, and it's like, nope, now children are getting abused. Yeah, and it's like, but this is what happened in American history, so deal with it.
Right. They were very good at timing those gut punches and landing them all pretty successfully. I can't remember if it was season 1 or season 2, but when Willie Jack goes into the woods with her dad and they kind of like connect over Daniel's death.
Yes.
That one hit hard. Them all finally getting to California, being on the beach. That was a beautiful one, but still an emotional gut punch.
Yeah, and I mean, even that when they take Cheese out camping and it's just like all fun, and then all of a sudden
all of the elders are
crying, and it's like, damn,
it's like shit.
Yeah.
And it does feel very authentic too, because like when you have trauma or things that you've been holding in for years and the conversation goes that way, it does feel like the mood of the conversation can just shift like that in real life, like on the drop of a hat.
And that's another thing about the show is I feel like you have shows that are about like adults or about children, whatever. But like this was about all of it. Like it was very much about like when they eventually convinced Maximus to leave his facility or whatever you want to call it. Like it was like the generational divide of how the elders deal with their trauma and all the stuff they've had to go through, and now this younger generation who has doesn't have the experience, the knowledge that the elders do, but have their own unique perspective on life and how you should deal with this kind of stuff. And it ultimately, like, as much as it's like about the elders guiding the youth along, like the youth ended up being super important in the elders getting past their trauma and stuff like that, which I thought was a really nice part of the show. Yeah, absolutely. Any other final thoughts before we dive into complaints, concerns, and our final score? No. It was. I'm sad it's gone. Same. I mean, I think like representation is super important. It's not very often that you see natives represented, and it's interesting. The Dear Lady, like she was the only other show I can really think of with like major indigenous representation is Letterkenny, right? And she's an actress in that as well. So like I definitely think like shout out. I'm glad that like Hulu FX gave them the platform to put the show on, because it was very beautiful, and I think like Native culture gets largely erased in America, and I think that's very unfortunate because it's very beautiful. Yeah, no, it is, and it was nice to see a lot of people that we've seen in other stuff pop up, like you mentioned, Dear Lady, the police chief. I've seen him in Fargo and a couple of other, and I think in
Westworld as well.
Okay.
And he's phenomenal in that. So it was pretty cool to see that representation played out. And a token white guy for a change, which was hysterical. Any complaints or concerns? I think we're in agreement that we needed more of the spirit guide. Anything else?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think what made this show good was all like the reason I liked the first few seasons of the shows were because of those funny moments, the young characters, spirit guide and stuff like that. And like we talked about, they got away a little bit away from it. But I think like that's a complaint. Sure. But at the same time, like to do what they needed and wanted to do with this show, they did that the right way.
Right.
And so like it is a complaint, but ultimately for the show to deliver the effect that it did, I think they needed to do what they did. So it's not even that much of a complaint, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think it all came together nicely in the end.
Yeah.
There were a couple episodes in the middle that were good for me, but it felt like too much of a diversion.
Sure.
But I do think they did a good job of bringing it all together in the end. Final score for this season out of 10.
For the season, I'm giving an 8. I think it was very good. I just, like we talked about, got lost a little bit at points in the middle, and I wanted more of the spirit guide. But I mean, it was like it was such a great show. And again, all the stuff from the representation, that them forcing certain things that I think people need to learn about, kind of in your face, like all of it, and just the actual the acting and writing was so good. That I did very much enjoy it. But if I'm grading just this season, like we talked about, I got lost in a couple of moments.
If it was for the show as a whole, would you go up, I'm assuming?
Oh yeah, I think I'm probably like 9.5, just because I so many little things. Like I don't know what it is about me. I'm a sucker for like dialect and stuff like that. So like Leonard Kenny, I love, because they have all these little figure it out then, like all these little things. And so like this show with like the Skoden and like the like all of that stuff, like it I just love like experiencing cultures that I don't necessarily get to experience that often, and this show did that for me. So like I thoroughly enjoyed the 3 seasons of this show.
I'm in the same boat as you. I think I'd give this season a 9 and the show overall a 9. It did for me in the middle. It kind of lost its way a little bit, but it's hard to fault it. And I love the fact that, like I said, this season was not pushed forward by any plot. It was a coming of age story without any like clear resolution, because there's so much life for these characters to live beyond that.
And it ultimately like wasn't that, and like it was a happy ending, but like the happy ending is his mom moving away, and his best friend also moving away, and now the one person he has is a relationship that they didn't really explore at all. But
can we talk about how out of pocket it was for the mom to tell Bear's girlfriend as she's leaving, leave his neck alone? I was like, damn, mom.
Oh, bro, fucking Bev and Bear when she comes up, when the Bear's mom, or not Bear, Big, when Bear's mom comes up to him after Cookie told him that Big and Bev were hooking up, and she starts making his noises to her. Big is a funny ass character too. They're all funny as shit, but
he's great. There were so many like little moments like that through the season that we could talk. We didn't even talk about the weird fish people in the woods.
Oh my god! Holy shit! Like that's one thing. Like they did a great job at making white people look weird as shit in this show. Which obviously white people and natives have a very interesting relationship in American history. And it was like kind of like you mentioned, like the token white, like they made the white people look the way that I think a lot like indigenous people are often made to look in like white pop culture, as like being this weird mystic, like all of this weird shit that they have going on, when it's like at the end of the day they're just also people, but they made the white people look like the weirdos, and I appreciated that.
I did as well. For anyone who's interested in this show, all 3 seasons are streaming on Hulu, so make sure you go and check it out. You can follow Shawn on Twitter at Shawn_DePaz. You can follow me on Twitter at Gerald Bourget, and until next time, keep it G-rated.